We're here in the lovely town of Sedgefield. Today, meeting with world-renowned veterinarian Dr. Ockert Botha. Thank you very much for making time for us. We know you got a hell of a busy schedule. We really appreciate it, but it's been a great need for the pigeon fancy on myself to try and get this done and pin you down for an hour or two to get your perspective on medications and obviously the Avio range and a bit more explanation going into that. And thank you for putting us up in your lovely place here in Sedgefield, your horse farm, which we're going to see later on. You got another two units here as well.
Units on Groenvlei,
on Groenvlei, yeah, and a beautiful area. But driving through here again yesterday just makes you proud to be South African again when you see the area. So thank you very much for having us.
No, Russell, thank you. From my side, I can emphatically say that, I'm just thrilled to be here and thrilled to be able to get onto the show finally. And it's not for a lack of trying from your side. I know you've tried a lot.
Both sides.
And for you guys to make the commitment to fly all the way up here, that's why I'm pleased that we could show you a little bit of the beauty of the garden route. Obviously, in time, if and when you come down again, we'll do it more thoroughly. But yes, I'm blissfully happy in Sedgefield. We moved down here about 3 years ago.
Okay.
And maybe I can just take you through a little bit of background of my childhood days.
Yes, please. If you can tell us how, because just last night while we were chatting, it came up that it's a full circle. So if you can just give us a little bit of background regarding that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so basically I was born in a little place called Kroonstad, which is now turned into one of the areas where things are not that great. And then just touching briefly on my father, because I think it's just he was really one of the most dynamic, charismatic guys I've ever known in my life, and I do owe a lot of what the man I am today to him. He was a pharmacist by profession. He actually studied in Potchefstroom as a pharmacist, and for some personal reasons, he never finished the final year, his practical year. So he could never really practice full out as a pharmacist, but he did a lot of assistant pharmacy work and owned a pharmacy in Leidenburg. He was one of those guys that was just a total entrepreneur, and I think myself and almost all of my kids, well, almost all of them now, have entrepreneurial sort of spirit, So that to me was something really important. When I studied at Onderstepoort, I already started looking into business ventures, etc. But in any case, so I was born there, and then basically we moved from Leidenburg. Maybe another interesting fact is I'm one of the few people that can claim to fame that I was in 11 schools in my 10 or 12 years of school going career.
That's almost one a year.
It was, and we had a particularly bad time, if you want to call it that, in the early time, because my happy years, if I remember the happy years, was the year 1967, when I basically came and stayed with my grandmother and my uncle. Again, a real mentor in my life, a really, really special person. So we stayed in Sedgefield on Lake Pleasant, on Groenvlei's banks.
Where your units are?
Where my units now am. So we, in that stage, I always say to people, I don't know if people, whether a youngster of 7 or 9 years old actually knows what they're thinking, but I remember clearly that I thought to myself, if ever someday I settle down, this is where I'd like to be. So I'm very blessed that happened.
Fantastic.
I spent a fantastic year, and then in Florida, we basically started our pigeon fancy sort of background. My father acquired some fancy pigeons, mostly Medinas. I remember clearly a cropper.
Was that for showing or just for?
No, we wanted to start showing, and we got them late in my standard 5 year. I helped him build the loft, etc. And but then he got a promotion, and he was transferred to Carltonville.
Okay.
And I did standard 7 to standard 9 in Carltonville. So I had 3 years in one high school, and 3 years in the primary school, and all the 9 others in those times. So it was a real challenge, and it was a case of, I think, learning you resilience and learning how to interact with people.
I was going to say, you build up different skills growing up that
Exactly.
way. Yeah.
So it's not easy, but it certainly taught me a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
So the beginning was fancy pigeons, and very from the outset, it was just birds was just always my life, and it was always my absolute passion.
Okay.
And it's remained that way up until today. Just to digress very quickly, I often have to take photographs for my wife when she trains our horses. And invariably when a hawk or something flies over, then I get sidetracked and I'm busy photographing. She looks at this, not another fool, So, so effectively, it's been a passion. We then moved to Carltonville, and shortly after we arrived in Carltonville in Standard 7, my dad acquired a small little loft and we started racing pigeons. And
so you raced there then?
Yeah, we raced from Standard 7 right through to Standard 9. We had this small little loft that he got for about 8 months or a year, and we just started breeding, and then he managed to acquire a beautiful loft. And I've actually got a really nice photograph, which I'll share with you guys, with my brother and myself. And my father was more of a doen dit type of guy, you know, so he couldn't even, as I can't put a nail into wood, but in any case, so we worked there and built the loft, and we flew with true legends. Kasmatia was there. So we spent all of those 3 years flying in the club with him and in the club and with Fed.
Yeah.
There was another Dutch guy, which I can't remember the name. Of course, we visited old Chris Merwe Senior many times in Potchefstroom. My father and him were quite close. And so that was something that I think just strengthened my love for pigeons.
Yes, and just on those two names that you've mentioned, Kasmatia and Chris Merwe.
Yeah.
I mean, those are, and I'm not the youngest, but those are guys that we've just heard about.
Yes.
You know, they're legendary names.
Yes.
And we've just heard how great they were, and we've never. So it's interesting that you knew them personally.
It really is. And as I say, Gus specifically sort of, I went into his loft and cleaned his loft, and it was a real
amazing
mentor story.
Yeah.
And, he was just an amazing, incredible stockman. When I talk to pigeon fanciers with the many lectures that I give,
yes,
I always make it so clear that you can have all the medicine in the world, you can have the best genetics in the world, you can have the best food, but the thing that distinguishes one fancier from the other fancier is that simple thing called stockman. And some pigeon fanciers, like my wife, just naturally have it. They can walk into a loft and they can perceive and see that there's something wrong when another person wouldn't even notice it. And Gus was just one of those. I mean, he was really incredible.
He must have been, because, I know that... I know he raced on the West End.
Yes,
which
it was in Carltonville, and then he moved to Randfontein.
Somewhere out there.
Yeah.
So but I think there's still some records today that haven't been...
Yeah, no,
with the amount of fanciers then, and he still holds the records today, he must have been some fancier. Yeah. Well, you would have known his results must have been incredible.
No, he was just amazing. And I think one of the other things that I can, we're talking very broadly now, but that I can also mention is that very, very often the top fanciers have the girl behind them, the woman behind them, and the wife behind them. And old Dola Matia, I mean, she scraped lofts and took the birds out for the tosses and everything. So they were a fantastic couple, and they actually stayed about 4 kilometers away from my brother, my older Boet, in Kenmare when they moved. So we really, in those years, it really strengthened my feeling for pigeons. And my father being a pharmacist, in the early years, even when he did a lot of locum work at pharmacies, I would go to the pharmacy in the evening and walk through the pharmacy and spend time with him. And I think I was the youngest kid that ever knew almost every single medicine's active name and what the composition was, So I already started studying it, if you want to call it there, and discussing it with my dad. So... Then we moved from there to Pretoria, and lo and behold, we got there and we bought a house in Waverley. And then we've had the other legend, old... goodness.
Must be Andre Carlson.
Andre Carlson.
I had the pleasure of meeting him.
Again, a true champion. I mean, definitively on par with the best in the world. You know,
Andre was he was
and before, along with him, there was Paper and Scores, which I remember clearly. They were a two-man show.
Yeah.
The one guy, I think Paper was in a wheelchair. And
yes, I think one was Donnie, and I can't remember the names, but I do know the names, yeah.
So that was PHS, Pretoria Homing Society,
that was strong,
we flew in. Yeah, it was an incredibly strong,
very strong
club. And I remember very clearly that one of the highlights of my life, we only won one derby race or one race in those 3 years that we raced, because my dad was a mob flyer, you know. And bless his soul, he loved to have 100 or 200, 300
you
pigeons.
get those guys, yeah.
And but he never spent a lot of money buying true stock. So we had this pied cock. We did the derby, the Colesberg Derby, and I think it was the second year we were there. This cock just dropped from way out there. You know the feeling, you know. And we got to the club and we actually beat everybody. And that was a real magic moment.
That's a magic moment.
And then from there I went to Onderstepoort.
So just before you get to Onderstepoort, what was the decision then, Doc, to study veterinary science? Why not a medical doctor or a pharmacist or a...
Look, I'm again one of the lucky guys, because, you know, so many kids suffer with not knowing what they want to do, you know, and they're not clear of what their vocation is. But I actually never had a second of doubt. When I was in Sedgefield, and please don't take this the wrong way, I always tell people this, it's not because I was a sadist or I was whatever, but I actually operated my first frog when I was 9 years old, you know. So I just knew I wanted to be a vet.
That was your passion.
It was my passion, and it was never even an issue. So I went to Onderstepoort. In those days, we had to study at all the different universities. You would enroll in a BSc degree, and you would then be chosen from all the universities. So we had about 550 applicants from all over the country, and they only chose 90, and I was fortunate enough to get in. But again, maybe I can digress a little bit, and when you get to my age, you get to an age where you like giving advice, you know, life advice to people. And it's important for me to sort of get people to understand that you don't have to be highly intelligent or highly special to do whatever you feel you want to do in life. You know, I was just a middle class student. I didn't even get a single distinction in my school years. But when I got to standard 10 to matric, I realized, listen, now I've really got to batten down, you know. And I literally spent my first year studying 10, 12, 14 hours a day, you know. And I think that's something that's stead me and my children in real good stead, is to basically say, what is the most important thing in life? It's actually to have commitment, to have drive, and to have an ambition to get something done, you know. So that's just a little bit of worldly advice. You know,
no, we appreciate that. So then it was then to Onderstepoort.
Then I went to Onderstepoort. We did our first year at Tukkies, all of us, and then we then went to the campus itself. And then having flown pigeons and still having the loft, the company Janssen Pharmaceutica.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember L-Spartacon and Spartrix. They were the only two products in South Africa, or the first two products that were registered in South Africa. And they were busy doing the registration trials. So that means you put the pigeons through the trials and you test the medicines and test whether it actually has side effects and stuff. And they heard about myself and they said, do you think you're capable of doing the trials? You know, and we spoke about it. And I actually did the registration trials for them at my own loft, you know. And that helped a heck of a lot because I saw the dossiers, we call it the dossiers. And it helped me in future to actually be able to register these products and develop them. And then in my third year, Piet van Zyl from Breakaway Products, a great friend of mine, and we were very close in our class. So
you were in class together?
We were in class together. We actually sat right next to each other. And we still, to this day, really good friends. We don't see each other enough, but we're really good friends. And we both, for our third year in pharmacology, in the study of medicines, we had to do a little thesis. So Piet did a summary of all the pigeon diseases, you know, so he summarized the diseases and the incidents. And I myself tested 3 medicines on pigeons.
Okay.
I tested malaria, embazin for malaria, sulfaquinoxaline, and that was the first treatment that we actually gave. None of the others worked very well.
So can I just ask you on that one,
Yes,
because
yeah,
someone asked me this week in the
okay,
shop
yeah,
on Embazin,
yes.
does it do malaria?
If you do it 3 days at the recommended dosage, it's got a fairly significant effect on the malaria parasite.
Okay.
It's not as good as the primaquine sulfate
Okay.
is,
Okay.
but at that stage we got adequately good results. Whereas none of the other things, the injectable tick bite fever medicines, none of those worked at all.
Okay.
So I did that one, and then I did a toxicity trial on Emtril, which was really interesting.
Sure, Doc. I've had that in the heat. The birds drinking Emtril and looking dizzy, and I didn't know what it was, and only later on found out it was that.
Yeah. So we dosed the pigeons then at once the dose, double dose, 3 times and 5 times, and we basically observed them, and the pigeons that then became ill, the typical falling around and loss of balance.
Yes.
We had the brains analyzed, and we understood exactly what it was doing, and we then realized that it was actually as a result of a vitamin B1 deficiency. So the Emtril actually suppresses the B1 manufacture of the bacteria in the gut.
Okay.
And then they get a B1 deficiency, and we managed to later on, when I developed Canker-X Plus.
I was going to ask you about that now, because I see that's got the B vitamin
B1,
with the active ingredient of the Emtril.
So we started adding the B1, and we found that the toxicity was much, much lower. You could go at 5 grams per 5 liters, not
8 liters.
Oh, yeah,
it's normally 5 per 8 liter.
8, so we could go at 5 grams per 5 liters.
Okay.
But for 3 days only.
Yes.
So that was interesting. And then the other thing I did was we did a summary of what would happen if you gave pigeons the benzimidazole type of anti-worms, the anti-helminthics, the worm medicine.
So that's only for the roundworms.
The sheep and cattle medicine, valbazin and multispec and all of those.
Yes.
Anything that ends on azole, so fenbendazole, valbazin, benzimidazole, those ones.
Yes.
And we actually, I then took photographs of, we dosed the babies at 3 days, and found how the feathers didn't grow out.
Okay.
So that was a really nice project that I did, and that's where the whole thing really started.
That's very interesting. Okay. So then that onderstepoort, and you obviously graduated, and then where does Dr. Botha go?
I did my military service then
did you?
Yeah, we did it after. You could elect to do it before
or after, yes.
And I was a bit of a pissy at school, so I didn't want to go in there and be.
So you would go to the army as a lieutenant,
Well, we went as a Karwe, which is Laras, and I can't not say any more slang. So that was the most miserable 3 weeks of my life, or 3 months of my life.
But then you would have got your pips.
Exactly. Then you got the pips, and you were slightly better off. So we did that, and I was fortunate to be placed at the animal clinic.
I was going to ask you now, would they use you?
They
your
used
degree
all of us. Some of the guys went to the border. Some was in the homelands, and they did work there.
Yeah.
And I was placed at the dog and horse clinic at the Ockert Botha.
Okay.
And then the captain was a guy called Chris Vogt. He basically is also a vet, and he was permanent force.
Okay.
And him and I started a project on trichomonas in dogs. So the crop tankers, they get the trichomonas in the intestinal tract. And we actually managed to get a growth medium where you could put the trikes in, and they would last. So that means you can actually take the trichomonas, do a smear, put it in this bottle with a transport medium, and then send it by post to actually check whether the birds still have trikes. And we're going to start looking at doing that.
Okay, that's interesting, because and you'll be able to correct me on this, but someone came into the shop maybe a few weeks ago and bought a coccidiosis medication, because they said the Yorkies get coccidiosis.
Yes, absolutely.
So I didn't know that.
No, they get coccidia. Cats get trichomonas. They get the other form of Giardia. So, I sort of had that research background, and I was just fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. To sort of take me into that. So I finished then the 2 years at Ockert Botha, and then immediately I joined a practice in Vereniging. I worked with this guy. He was a third very important person in my life, Jack de Lange, Dempsey de Lange. He had a small animal practice in Vereniging. And I basically worked with him at the practice as a student, and often locumed there and worked for him.
Okay.
And then when I got out of university, I went immediately after the army period and helped him open a practice in a small suburb in Vereniging.
Okay.
And that's where I actually started doing pigeon analysis. The guys from Van der Bijl Park and Vereniging and later on all over the Gauteng would bring their pigeons for the crop smears and fecal flotations and blood smears and stuff. So we offered that as a little service.
And then in those days, then obviously Medpet and these other companies weren't around.
No, the company that was around was Niels Nels Exeter.
Exeter was around.
Exeter was around, and he had a lot of really world-class first-line medications and grits, and
yes,
he did the bullet drinkers.
And he brought in the natural products.
Exactly. So him and I were very close friends, and he was a fantastic guy. Really, really.
Shame, he comes here, he visits me about once a month.
Joking.
Yeah, he does.
Really?
Yeah, him and his son, Jan.
Yeah. So and that again helped me to learn more about, and I've still got, to this day, I've got his one catalog, that we actually had those days. So then I was in Vereniging for about 2 years because I had a state bursary. And I spent my first year, believe it or not, as a qualified vet at the Shamdor abattoir.
That's on the West Rand.
On the West Rand. And after a year, I bought my bursary back, and I basically then went to Pretoria because I locumed in Pretoria when I was in the army at Hatfield Bird and Animal Hospital. It was then just Hatfield Animal Hospital. And I locumed there and then joined the practice. Then the moment I went back, I joined the practice. As an assistant, you call them assistant vets. So the owner, he's the principal vet, and you join, you do all the veterinary work, etc. But you get a salary. And I was assistant vet for a year or two, and then I bought into the practice. And again, I was very, very fortunate that old Chris Kingsley, I don't know if you know him.
I know the name, but I don't know him. Yeah.
No, he's again a legend in the avian work.
He was in the avian, and he used to do a lot of the parrots and the African greys and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So he joined our practice. He rented a consulting room and joined the practice. And when he went away, and I started doing more and more of the work on the parrots themselves as well. And that's when we then turned it into Hatfield Bird and Animal Hospital. It was the first bird and animal hospital in South Africa.
I've actually just remembered where I know his name from. There used to be a magazine, I don't know if it still comes out, Avisandum.
That's right.
And he used to be in,
often
in there.
Dave Dennison started that. He started the AV products as well. And then at that stage, then in the Vereniging days, I just basically sold the guys whatever was available.
Then,
And then I realized, let's see if we can start tinkering around. And I started playing around with some available current injectable products. And I started mixing leverstim myself in the practice, longstim and bloodstim. And then
but those are not injectable, though.
No, they weren't. But I mixed injectables to make that up. And got the formulation in that way. And then I approached a manufacturing facility, and I said, "Can you make this for us?" So we looked at the formulation that those 3 injectables gave you, and then he made the leverstim for me, and then bloodstim, and then the longstim. Longstim was never injectable, so those were 2 that we.
Longstim's got the antibiotic in it.
And the amoxicillin
in it, yeah.
And that's that. I think if I pride myself on one thing is that of the 100 products that more or less 100 products that I've registered and developed, a lot of those have been world breakthrough products. Have been products that nobody else in the world has ever had or has, and a lot of guys copied me on things.
And they've maintained.
Exactly,
yeah. And a lot of guys have had, I know, have had huge success with those products. So
thank you.
Yeah. So it's.
So we mixed those, and then we started Medpet in 1988. I founded Medpet. And we basically had those 3 products, and we then looked at the at a crop canker product.
So was Medpet then based
in Pretoria at the hospital?
At the hospital there. Okay.
So we just started it very, very small, and the guys started buying from us at the hospital. I later on opened Econovet, which was about 3 kilometers higher up in Pretoria Street. That was the first retail pigeon and pet supply company in Pretoria, big. So we sold all the Medpet products and dog food and stuff there. And then the Meditrick was we were selling a lot of the metronidazole for canker. Again, the guys were
liquid
then,
or
the tablets, the human tablets.
human tablets.
There were a whole lot of different
that
ones,
the flagyl?
and all of those generics. But we found that the biggest problem was this vomiting that we got.
Yes.
And then we developed, with the help of another company, we developed the cellulose coating initially, that we coated the tablets, and that stopped the vomiting.
Okay.
And where the other guys were using 20 milligrams per kilogram for 5 days, I did the research, and we found that you could use a 100 milligram tablet, which is a really high dose. But strangely enough, metronidazole doesn't have the toxicity that dimetronidazole that Emtrol has.
Yeah.
So that was the next really big one, was the coated tablet.
Okay.
And then Medpet just grew from there and there. Then in around about 2000, I moved the practice from Hatfield to Linwood, and we built a complete big referral veterinary hospital there, and that I just realized
more complete.
Complete, yeah. And I realized I had to sort of do one or the other thoroughly. And a company approached me, and they then wanted to buy shares in Medpet, and I sold them shares, but still stayed on board as an advisor and a minority shareholder.
So the guys that bought on were not veterinarians?
They weren't. They owned the veterinary wholesale company, the largest veterinary wholesale company in South Africa, called Lakato.
Okay.
Very, very nice guys, 3 partners, and they basically then bought from me. And then we branched out and started developing dog products, the Doxy Dog and the Mediworm and the Medpet and all of those.
Okay.
We developed those, or I developed them, and they ran the company, and I could focus on my veterinary hospital,
Okay.
And then, unfortunately, the bigger companies, the big pharmas, Bayer and Zoetis and those companies started complaining, because they said you can't be a wholesaler for them and basically have your own line of products.
Sure.
And they then sold the company, their shares, their controlling shareholding, which they sold to the current owners, the Pickard brothers.
Okay.
And they were completely financial people. And we just didn't see eye to eye, and in the end,
exactly.
Yeah. So it was like a divorce, and I had to relinquish my shares in Medpet.
Okay.
And then at that stage, I got married to Sana, so there was a big sort of change in my life, and I decided I wanted to look at dog food as a new challenge. And I joined NOLA, the company NOLA, and developed for them, helped them rejuvenate their dog food and goodness,
Okay.
And then finally, just finishing up then in 2012, or maybe just step back and say that in that time then, Sana originally sold a lot of the Medpet products. She had a little company that did the distribution of the Medpet products.
So she had her own little
distribution company of the Medpet products. Two dealers, etc.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was terminated. And then at that stage already, she started using some of the horse products that we've developed. Later on, she started using when this sort of move away from Medpet started or happened. And then she basically developed some of those horse products into 2 or 3 avian products. Okay. And I basically supported her just with some advice, etc., but completely stepped back.
Yeah.
And then she founded Aviomed in 2007, 2008. She founded Aviomed. And I mean, I'm just so incredibly proud that she literally ran that company and built it to what it was until 3 years ago, So
it's fantastic.
I told her, please get rid of all your clients, your horse clients, your training clients. It's just too much trouble, and it's not worth it.
It's a hell of a lot of
and
work.
She jumped into it, boots and all, and she really built the company, literally built it, girl alone, to where it was.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And then while trying to get this podcast going, Doc, you've been around the world, I would say, giving presentations and lectures and stuff. Give us a little bit of insight on that.
That happened. That started very early on in the Medpet days, because I realized that you need to go and educate the pigeon fanciers.
Yeah.
There was just and I'm extremely, extremely proud of the education that I've managed to transfer to pigeon fanciers, because it's really well known in my mind, and I think all over the world, that South African pigeon fanciers are more clued up about diseases than most other pigeon fanciers in the world.
Yeah.
We love our medicines, and I think
Yeah.
sometimes we use too much
of it, yeah.
Undoubtedly. And especially when we started looking more and more on the Aviomed side, we realized that you need to do more natural products and combine that with your mainstream medication.
Okay.
But so I gave lectures originally just in South Africa. I remember I did a lecture in Standerton, and there was another legend of the sport. I can't remember his name now, but so I went.
Standerton could be Robert Scott.
No, he was a South African. He was farming there, him and his sons. But he was really, really a top fancier as well.
I knew Robert was in Standerton, but I can't.
Yeah. So basically, I did all of these lectures all over the country, in Uppington and bloody well all over. Flew to Cape Town and all over, and did the lectures and spoke about our products.
Yeah.
And then very briefly, Butrosky heard about myself, and he phoned me and he said, "Listen, that was late 1990s."
Yes, I wanted to get onto that.
So he then phoned me one day and he said, "Hi, this is Butrosky," because Nico Dreyer.
If I can just stop you there,
yes,
Doc,
sure.
And if you can just for a lot of the guys that don't know, we had the Olympiad and we had all of that. How great an influence that specific man was in the pigeon industry in South Africa.
Yeah. No,
just
incredibly.
briefly,
I mean,
because you knew him well.
Very, very, very much so. And, he was the type of guy that you either loved him or you hated him. And I think, as in everything in life, there was so much jealousy because of what this guy achieved.
100%.
And I think I told you very briefly the story last night about how he actually got his riches.
Yes.
So essentially, in a nutshell, he knew about Jamie Ace that made the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy. And when he saw the movie, he realized that this thing had potential to actually be distributed worldwide. And he acquired the rights for distribution of the movie from Jamie Ace. At that stage, he was a motor technician, motor mechanic. And I don't think he was that he wasn't well-to-do financially.
No.
And he gave up everything and he flew to America, him alone, for many months. It's almost like old Chris Barnard's story.
Yeah.
But in any case, and he marketed The Gods Must Be Crazy there, and it did well. He walked from studio to studio, and lived in a little flat.
Unbelievable.
And basically got the rights, and he started selling the movie, and it was a worldwide hit. And then he got back and he had the finances, and he was just a very astute businessman.
So, and then his influence on the pigeon industry
was enormous, immense. He brought in such incredibly good. Because he knew the Belgians and the Holland fanciers very, very well.
Yes.
So then he decided he was going to do the first ever Pigeon Olympiad in South Africa. Oh, not in South Africa, away from Europe.
Yes.
It had never, ever been done.
Yes.
And I mean, to do it in South Africa was almost an impossibility, because you've got to understand, you've got to bring those pigeons, million rands or euros worth of pigeons to South Africa. They then have to stay in quarantine. It would have been in quarantine for a month, then go back into quarantine, stay and go back to Europe and stay in quarantine there. And he then phoned me and he said he heard from Nico Dreyer that I was heavily involved in pigeon fancy, etc. And is there something we could do? And we actually came up with the idea of taking, at the CITCC in Cape Town, taking a massive tent, so a sort of almost a circus tent. And we erected the circus tent there. And we flew to Belgium, him and Nico Dreyer and myself and the state veterinarian. We actually co-opted her and he paid for her to fly there. And we actually saw the board of the pigeon, what is it called? The
FCI.
FCI. We actually sat in a meeting with them and explained this crazy idea to them. And so we said, listen, what we'd like to do is we'll have the tent there, and the pigeons will fly into Jan Smuts.
It's a crazy idea.
It's just, I mean, it was just ridiculous, I mean, how we got to this. I think it was actually, to be fair, it was actually But that said, can't this be done? And we said, but this is impossible.
Yeah.
The more we spoke about it, the more it sort of happened. And we convinced them that we would fly the pigeons in. They would be taken from the airport directly under supervision, under guard, in closed baskets, in a closed, vehicle, and then be transferred into this regulated, air-conditioned tent. And all of the best fanciers in the world actually sent their pigeons here. They were taken into the tent, and you had big windows, you know, the plastic windows
Yes,
that the
yes,
guys
yes,
could
yes,
actually
yes.
look through. So the fanciers themselves weren't allowed to go into the tent,
Yeah,
only the
the
judges.
judges, yeah.
And the judges would then go in, you know, get dressed and everything, and then
Okay.
basically there's a double door so that there are no mosquitoes or anything can get out. And we did
So it was actually a quarantine station
it
then?
was a quarantine station, a temporary quarantine
Okay.
station. And they were allowed to then fly back again to Europe.
Yeah, that's how, and security there,
And,
Doc?
oh, it was incredible. I mean, you can imagine the value
Yeah,
of the pigeons that were
yeah.
there, you know. And they also obviously did the one race loft then, and they
That's
built
right,
the one
yes.
race loft, and it
That's
was
right.
just a whole Olympiad.
Yes.
And that's where I then met King Faisal, not King Prince Faisal. So he came to the $1 million, and of course a lot of European guys. But on our travels there, also we visited a lot of lofts,
I'm
which
sure,
was
yeah.
fantastic to see these top people.
No,
You know.
it's, yeah.
And then Prince Faisal was there, and he then acquired the distribution rights of Medpet in Saudi.
Okay.
So the first lecture that I then went and did outside of South Africa was actually in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And it was the strangest thing, and I don't know how much time we've got. We're actually spending too
No,
much time on this.
we're fine, we're
So
fine.
the interesting thing was that they arranged the visa for me, and the visa was basically issued in 2000 and in 9/11. On the day of 9/11, the visa was issued. And when I visited America a few years later, they actually took me into a little room and started questioning me, you know, and there was real issues. What are you? Because I was darkly tanned and I had a long beard and I looked a little bit like a
An
you know,
Easterner,
Saudi or
yeah.
Eastern. So it was a big interesting thing, you know. So but it was an incredible thing. So I actually went there and we visited his palace, and he had a loft that was actually, you can't believe it. It was like a 3-story house in the most expensive place with air conditioners in all the rooms, and this massive loft where he flew from, you know. And it was just an experience you can't imagine. And
so the prince is into pigeons
he was
himself?
he was the 13th prince, and I think he's passed away now. We lost contact, but it was just amazing also to see how they flew pigeons and how different it was there.
Because they got the heat factor there,
that tremendous heat factor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I did lectures all after that all over the world, Portugal and England and Holland and in America. I did 4 consecutive years at the AHU, the African Homing Union. 4 years consecutively, they invited me to go to their conventions, annual convention. We did the MPA where old Mike Tyson was there at the MPA. He shows pigeons, so I met him and did lectures there. And then the last one I've done was in October now. I think, you know, we went to the
that's
MPA.
The one where I got hold of you and you said you're on your way to the States.
That's right, yeah.
What was that one about then, that
That's
lecture?
the annual NPA, the National Pigeon Association, so their fancy pigeon show. So they've got they also move that around. And it was just opportune that it was in Louisville, Kentucky, because Sana's daughter, my stepdaughter, trains horses in Louisville. So we actually visited her in August. And in August, they have the Young Bird show in Louisville, which we just visited. I didn't do anything there. We just went and visited it. And then in October, they have the National, and there was 7,000. They had 7,000 fancy pigeons there. It's just an incredible thing to see, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I think it was 250 or so different breeds. And you know, the popular breeds, there would be like 150, 200, 300, 400 Modinas on show, you know. So there I
Must be a sight, eh?
Oh, it was a sight you can't imagine. You know.
Yeah.
Met a lot of the really top fancy pigeon thingers. And
tell me, Doc, any veterinarians into pigeons that side, or
they've got a few, and there was actually one vet at the show that at my lecture that came from one of the other counties, you know, one of the other. But they're very little. Eh? It's much like South Africa. You know, we've got 4 avian pigeon vets in South Africa, 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
They may have 10 or so, but a lot of them have actually very, very, very few vets know anything about pigeons. They're even less informed than we are. Our vets are on pigeons. You know, so.
That's strange. Why do you think that is, though? Because having such a huge pigeon,
it's a very difficult
community
question. You know, I don't know. It's never. There was a guy called Dr. Harker, if I remember correctly. He wrote a book on pigeons, and he was quite into pigeon, but he was more a pathologist. He wasn't a clinical vet. And you get quite a lot of the guys at the universities.
I think there was a Dr. Whitney as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but that's about the only ones I know.
As I say, they're not many in practice themselves. You know, so it's strange.
Ones would have thought. Like Australia's got one we know of. Colin Walker.
Exactly.
South Africa, I think we got 3 that I know of.
Yeah.
So it's strange that.
No, it's amazing. You know, I think it's such a closed community that and the pigeon fanciers so often do their own thing. You know.
Yes.
So and it's actually it's such a pity because the vet can actually add so much. But the problem is if the guys don't have the knowledge, then often it's almost. You know, it makes it very, very difficult for them to add valuable information. You know,
so, it can be detrimental because you know at the end of the day, the pigeon is an athlete. Our pigeons, so you need to balance. Which I liked what you said just now. Balance the natural with the.
You know that's something that the more I went into this whole thing, and that's where we'll talk later a bit about my human nutraceutical company and the veterinary side one, but I just started realizing more and more that, especially in the racing pigeon and the fancy pigeon, where they're so heavily stressed. That's a scenario where you can't rely on the medicines alone. You know, you've got to strengthen the bird's natural immunity, and vice versa. There's no way, in my mind, and I'm being quite honest about it, there's no way that you can fly pigeons only with natural medicines. There are guys that do that effectively, and what I always say in that scenario is it can be done, but then you have to have a strain of pigeons that you've bred specifically for immunity as almost your first port of call.
Yes.
And then take that immunity and then start selecting for performance. You know? There are a few very fortunate guys in South Africa and worldwide that do minimal treatment. But again, looking into the camera, I can also tell you that there are many natural flyers that actually have their own little pharmacy, you know. And when you visit them and you get into the back room in the right place and you open it up, oh, lo and behold, you know, here it is. So, and I think it's the pigeon, you've been in it yourself for so long, it's the pigeon mentality, you know. We are very, very, very secretive about and that maybe is one of the biggest problems in our fancy still
I think it is a very big problem. You know, that's why we're doing these podcasts, is to get more advice out and professional advice, you know, which is very important. You know, coming from someone with you, it's more of an authority. Now they can see that it's not just thumb sucking. It's from years of experience, development, studies.
And I think the big thing that, from my perspective, also for a veterinarian, if you're involved in pigeon medicine and pigeon therapy and pigeon treatment, the big single factor is that you've got to be progressive in your research. And that's something that I find that a lot of the pigeon medicine companies don't do. They have products that have been developed 20 years ago and that are were great products. But as time progresses, you get resistance against the antibiotics. There's a whole lot of new stuff coming out. And remember, when we talk about coccidia and the worms, etc., that I tell you about this exciting new thing that's just come to the market. So I spend about easily 20 hours a week researching every conceivable thing, animal medicines, dog, cat, and every 3 months I search our veterinary databases, our research databases, of which there are 3 major ones. So it's almost a Google in many. And if you go onto those databases and you search the newest articles, you get all the newest research.
Okay.
And that's how the whole Pakistani strain of BMV, which we'll talk about, also came about. And to me, that's just important for me to reiterate that when you're looking at a company supplying pigeon medicines, yes, there can be the older generation products that are good and that are mainstay products, but you need to find a company that's progressive and that progressively looks at new innovations. And that in the new innovation has brought so much to my company, to our company.
And I think it also brings success to pigeon fanciers, to us,
absolutely, because the more you can get rid of the mainstream medications, up to a certain point, the better. And we've now got about, I'd say 50% of our products are natural products with no drop of antibiotic or antimicrobial in there, and they work interactively, synergistically with the medicines. And I think that's a real. To me, that's a passion as well, is to really be able to.
I like exactly what you said there, because I've been in the game for over 30 years, and still people are saying, but that medicine used to work those, and it just doesn't seem to be working now anymore. So that progressiveness that you've adopted is very enlightening.
And interestingly enough, you can get to a scenario where you've got, and a very nice example is lincospectin.
Yes.
Lincospectin basically disappeared off the market a few years, 10 years, 15 years ago. It was an incredible antibiotic, and that's something that also is a major issue for us, because a lot of the poultry medicines that we use as pigeon fanciers, companies have discontinued. And I can't tell you how many veterinary products there are in the world today that's been discontinued. And again, if
I get questions for them about them, and I'd have no answers about where they are.
But the interesting thing is that you may get a product like lincospectin that disappeared off the market or was very difficult to get hold of. So it was no longer used extensively. And then when somebody brings it back, like we brought back lincospectin now, it suddenly works very, very well again, because the resistant bacteria within our pigeon population has actually almost lost that resistance. But if you're ongoing, and I think terramycin is an absolute case in point. I see absolutely no place really for terramycin in our treatment.
Is that so? No.
You could have Emtrol, terramycin and Thailand combination, which used to work very well.
It used to be the
was
famous
the
bomb.
Exactly. And these days I question how effective it is. And maybe, guys will look at this podcast and say, I can tell you it still works. And great, then it works in theirs. But generally speaking, scientifically speaking, there's no justification for it, because it's all three are older generation antibiotics that basically have a lot of resistance.
Okay, so when you say that, like the oxytetracycline that's come out now, is that, you reckon that's
terramycin? The red terramycin was basically straight oxytetracycline.
Yes.
And then you had Terravit that came out.
Yes.
That was also the red one, but that had vitamin B complex added to it. And that was already in the market. It was the third antibiotic after penicillin. It was penicillin, sulfonamides, and then the terramycins came out. So my dad actually sold that in their pharmacies in the 50s, and gradually there's just a lot of resistance that's built up against it. Terramycin, you have to take the grit away, for instance. You can't give it with grit. Doxycycline, it's not so important. So then doxycycline came on the market, and it's also been around for a long, long time. But it's just so much more superior to the oxytetracycline. And so you get all of these the zithromycin, which we basically starting to look at now to input into some of our pigeon products. There's many of these newer generation antibiotics and antimicrobials, which you can basically look at and integrate into your treatment program.
Okay, so these newer medications, are they always improvements? Have they gone through the tests? Have they gone through
That's a very, very good question, Russell. So, I mean, if you look at repurposing, and that happened in COVID a lot. Okay,
Yeah.
so you would have something like ivermectin is the
Yes.
classical example,
Yeah.
you know, and whatever you believe or don't believe about ivermectin, in my perception, and I have believed that it definitively had an action against COVID, and it had its place in COVID treatment. It wasn't the be all or end all, but they repurposed that, and they found that that works very well for that virus. You know?
Yes. Yes.
But having said that, you can't just grab any new antibiotic and say this is going to be great, because you
Okay.
don't know what the side effects of it's going to be on the kidneys and the liver, and
Sure.
and very importantly, a pigeon is not a small chicken, and a pigeon's not a very small human being, or a dog, or a cow. So you can't extrapolate what works in a dog and a cat and a human to pigeons. Okay. You get an idea, and you then start off on that point, and you start looking
from there.
But that's the beauty of these PubMed type of publications, the real, we call it evidence-based medicine,
That's what I was
where the research has been done, and where the people have gone and said, listen, right, this is the new product of choice, and we now make sure how long it stays in the body, what is the correct dosage, what's the side effects of these. So, you know, it's not a case of just grabbing it out of the air.
That was my question.
It needs to be researched.
It's researched and tested, and
exactly.
And the results come out, and you take it all from there.
Sometimes you do your very level best, and you research it, and the publications are there, and you bring it to market, and there's still some side effects, like thalidomide was in human beings. You know, with all of the work that they do, it's not always a guarantee that the thing may be on the market for 2 or 3 years, and you find, oh my goodness, you know, there's some of these or that side effects. So these things are all ongoing research. It's not it ends here and that's where it ends. You know?
It's just getting onto that research side of things. If you take the poultry industry, the size of the poultry industry compared to the size of the pigeon industry, we're minuscule. So to get those tests done,
that is
must be a challenge.
It is a challenge, you know, and that's why I think why we get so few newer products these days, because it's a case of you've got to now go and search, has that research been done? If it hasn't been done, when I was in Pretoria, I had my own research loft. I had a loft with 100 pigeons, more or less 100 pigeons, and we bred those babies in captivity, in bad environment, if you want to call that, a little bit of overstocking of so that you get the natural stress scenario.
Yes.
That's when we talk about the vaccine. We'll talk about the Pakistani strain, how we actually got the strain. So, but I think there's almost no research facilities. So if research is done, true scientific research is done, it's normally done at university level or somebody, and that's not often that comes about. You know? And it's difficult to bring a new thing to market if you don't have that background.
That's why I'm asking you also.
And we're basically going to be building a new research loft now, you know.
Oh, are you?
On the farm, yes.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Because it's very difficult to do the final product placement, and thing is, if you're not able to do that.
To test it.
In the early days with the Aviotrich and all of those, I normally had 4 or 5 fanciers that we would, and in this last 3 years, that's what we've been doing. When we bring something, we give it to guys and say, test it for us and see how it works, you know. But it's better to have your own research.
Sure, because you got your own loft, you test your birds and see exactly what the reaction is to the medication. And then, are there any new? You mentioned progressive, so you're obviously working on new medications.
Yeah, we constantly are. The newest
products, I should say, not medications.
The new ones, and we can talk briefly on that. When we get there, we'll grab 5 or 10, 8 of the new stuff, and I'll briefly explain. The real exciting one is the new canker combination product, because that's I don't know if you remember or you know the Ronsec.
Very well.
Ranitidazole and secnidazole. So that actually, I developed that because we found about 5 years before I exited Medpet, we found that we were starting to get these resistant strains of trichomonas, of crop canker. And we started looking into, again, a full research thing as we tested chlorhexidine, disinfectants, we did the injectable, antibiotics, the injectable things that you do for dogs with biliary.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think we did 10 different products, that we tested, and nothing worked. We had a strain of resistant trichomonas that we got, if I remember correctly, it was from a fancier in Rustenburg. He brought some pigeons and we tested them and they treated, and he tested them again and they were still positive, and we tested and they were still, and that's where these hyper-resistant strains, I identified them.
Okay.
And it's an interesting, just a digression, and it's not proven in fact, but if you look at the trichomonas under the microscope, it's normally a pear-shaped organism. You can see it clearly and it moves around. But those resistant ones, every single one of the resistant ones that we found had an elongated shape. So it looked different you could almost say when you
How would you know that it's trichomonas then if its shape was different?
It still has the three flagella that said it moves, and it moves like the trichomonas, but it just has a long sort of shape.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at what we could do, and we developed the slow release ronidazole, secnidazole combination. But even that has now gotten to a point, the Ronsic, where there's a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
And then the new thing that came about, the new research that came about from human side, was that if you add chitosan, which is a nutraceutical thing, if you add that to the thing, is that it in itself kills canker, trichomonas, but it also augments the effect of metronidazole, ronidazole, secnidazole.
Okay.
So we basically brought this avionidazole tablets to the market, which contains the ronidazole, secnidazole in a slow release, but it's the first one in the world that's got chitosan to augment the treatment. We've had incredible results with it.
Is that already on the market?
Yeah, it's just been launched about 4 months ago. So it was before the big. I think the guys are going to start using it now.
So that's very
interesting. It's called avionidazole tablets.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So
that's just a practical example of how you can work two different things together, and ongoing research.
Yes. And then, Doc, we've gone around and around. Then how to settle back in Sedgefield? Yeah, because you've had the practice and everything's going up in Pretoria.
Yeah, so we stayed on a small holding in the eastern side of Pretoria. We had our horse farm there, a plot, an 8-hectare plot, and the crime just became really bad. And we had a very unfortunate incident of one of our people actually being shot on the farm. And I'd always come back to Sedgefield to holiday here, and we actually rented a holiday home. And then we just at one stage, when this happened, we said, now we have to start looking. And I think my childhood dream sort of resurfaced, and we said, let's see if we can actually get that done. And we were very, very fortunate in being able to acquire the rental agreement for the farm. So the horse section of our farm, where we keep the stables, is a 54-hectare portion, and we'll hopefully show you guys some video of it. And we then moved, and 3 years ago we moved back here. So I commute quite a lot still.
I was going to ask you now. So for the business, then obviously you're down here. Avio is up there.
Avio, the manufacturing facilities. We've got 3 or 4 different facilities that manufacture for us. And basically we contract to them, and then I think we, in total, my partner and myself own 6 different companies now, which is Aviomed is basically Sana's. It belongs to her, so I'm the only husband that works for his wife.
I don't think you're the only one.
And basically, but the other companies are all our pet-related products. So we've got Vets Brands, which is the dog food company that sells exclusively, and pet product company that sells to veterinarians only. The compounding pharmacy, VetScripts, where we make medicines for veterinarians on script, and which I also make my prescription products. And then basically the Ronsic, which is the human company, and then 2 trading companies. But the main office of that is now in Stellenbosch. They moved the admin offices there.
To Stellenbosch.
So it's just the manufacturing facilities and the stores, the distribution centers that are up there.
And then you mentioned last night or yesterday when we were having a meal that you got distribution partner in the States.
Yes, that's interesting, and thank you for asking that. So that's Foyers. Actually, that's another quite interesting story. Just after we started our Sana started the Aviomed company, her daughter Nicola's biological father stays in Louisville,
Okay.
and he basically trains horses there. And she actually went to school in America for a year, staying with her dad. And basically, she commuted up and down visiting her dad. And then Jerry Garnier from Foyers actually heard about Aviomed, because Jed's Pigeon Supplies distributed Medpet. And I often went to Jed's, and we did lectures along with Jed's when I promoted the Medpet range of products. And then when Aviomed was founded, Jerry Garnier found me from Foy's Pet Supplies. They're actually the oldest pigeon supply company in America. They were started in the 1800s, 1880s, I think. And then another guy bought it, and then Jerry bought it. His daughter Kim has now taken over the company, and they basically, it's a primarily internet-based pigeon supply company, like most of the companies are in America, the big ones. You know? So guys order online, etc. And he founded, and he said he'd like to import the Aviomed range. And we sent Nicola, she was basically in her first year of study. We basically sent her to represent us. And she flew down from Louisville to Pittsburgh and met with them and put the whole deal together, and they started importing Aviomed. So that's many, many years ago, and they're still our sole Aviomed distributor in the States. So we have a very close working relationship, Kim, and she was actually visited the NPA along with us, because they visit these shows and have stands there. You know?
Then with all these animal businesses, somewhere along the line yesterday we got into human
products.
Can you give us a little bit of a rundown about that?
So the company is called RINTON. It's an acronym for Research into Nutraceuticals. And I had a brief spell of working with human nutraceuticals with a partner, medical doctor partner, many, many years ago, because when I developed the dog nutraceutical products, I was the first person in South Africa and one of the first in the world that combined 4 different active ingredients for knee joint degeneration and arthritis for Medpet. It was called R3 joint, the tablet. And a lot of the people asked me, the vets asked me, can we drink this? You know, it works so well on the dogs, can we actually drink it? You know, and from that it developed that we started this human company. But I think I mentioned to it, we did the distribution incorrectly. We thought that the doctors would prescribe these things. And we shelved it. We became so busy that we shelved it. And when COVID started, when it broke out, the day that it broke out, well, that it was identified first in South Africa, we were in Namibia, my partner and myself. We were actually there, and we flew back. And I said to him, we're going to start a new nutraceutical company because the time is right now. You know? So we've got Trinton, which has got currently 5 products. And we'll talk, if we've got time, briefly on that. And they're based on all of the research and stuff, the evidence-based, background. And they specifically human,
specifically for human based,
because we've got a very, very big, real specialized range in the dog and cat side. We call it the focus range of Vets brands. And we've actually moved from the name nutraceuticals to therapeuticals, because they're more treatment nutraceuticals. You know, they're so well designed that they actually treat disease and prevent and manage, you know, along with mainstream medication again, but they just really, really have special.
Support each other.
And I'll maybe show you 1 or 2 of what they look like, just for interest sake.
Thank you very much.